I accidentally saw my boyfriend's dark past, and it changed everything. Imagine being in a happy relationship for 2 years. You're talking about marriage. You're looking at houses together. You're planning a future that feels stable, exciting, and safe. And then one evening, a message appears on your phone. It's from your boyfriend's ex. The message contains only a single link and a short line that simply says, "Enjoy." Curiosity takes over. You click the link. Within seconds, you realize the video playing on your screen contains someone you know very well. Your boyfriend, the man you love, the man you were about to build a life with. And suddenly everything you thought you understood about him feels different. This is the story of how one video from the past almost destroyed a relationship in the present. I'm 26 years old, and about 2 years ago I met a guy named Michael. We met through a mutual friend at a small birthday party. It wasn't one of those loud, crazy parties. It was just a small gathering at someone's apartment with music playing softly in the background and people chatting in different corners of the room. At first, Michael didn't stand out much. He seemed quiet and a little reserved. While most people were laughing loudly and moving around the apartment, he mostly stayed near the kitchen counter talking to 1 or 2 people at a time. Later in the evening I went into the kitchen to grab a drink, and he happened to be standing there. We started talking casually. At first it was normal small talk. Where we worked, what we studied in college, the usual things people ask when they first meet. But something about the conversation felt easy. One topic turned into another, and before either of us realized it, we had been talking for almost 3 hours while the party slowly died down around us. He made me laugh. I made him laugh. There was no awkward silence, no forced conversation. It just flowed. A few days later he asked me out for coffee, and that coffee date turned into dinner, and that dinner turned into a relationship. About a month into dating, something happened that I still remember clearly. Michael asked if we could talk about something serious. His tone made me nervous right away. We were sitting on his couch when he said it. His hands were clasped together, and he kept looking down at the floor as if he was trying to figure out how to start. Finally he said he needed to tell me something about his past. He explained that before we met, he had lived a very reckless life. He told me he had hurt people emotionally, made bad decisions, and spent several years not really caring about the consequences of his actions. But about a year before meeting me, something had changed. He said he realized he didn't like the person he had become. So he decided to turn his life around. He started fixing relationships he had damaged. He worked harder at his job. He tried to become someone he could actually respect. While he was talking, I could see that these memories weren't easy for him to revisit. So I asked him one simple question. I asked if anything he had done involved serious legal trouble, like jail or anything like that. He immediately shook his head and said no. He explained that his mistakes were mostly about lifestyle choices and hurting people emotionally, not crimes. That answer made me feel more comfortable. Everyone has a past. Everyone has regrets. What mattered to me was that he seemed honest about it. So we continued dating. Over the next few months our relationship grew stronger. Michael turned out to be one of the most thoughtful people I had ever dated. If I had a stressful day at work, he would listen patiently without interrupting. If I mentioned liking a certain snack once, he would remember it weeks later and surprise me with it. He paid attention to small details that most people overlook. 6 months into our relationship, he asked if we could have another serious conversation. This time he looked even more nervous than before. He sat down across from me and said something that immediately made my stomach tighten. He said he needed to confess the worst thing he had ever done. My mind immediately started racing with possibilities. But the truth ended up being something I never expected. When he was 22 years old, during the period of his life when he said he was making reckless decisions, he had appeared in an adult video. He explained that it happened during a time when he was partying a lot, not thinking about the future, and making impulsive choices. He said someone offered him money and he didn't take the situation seriously. At the time it seemed like just another wild decision during a chaotic period of his life. But afterward, he regretted it deeply. He said it was one of the biggest mistakes he had ever made. While he was explaining all of this, he looked genuinely ashamed. He wasn't proud of it. He wasn't laughing about it. He looked like someone remembering a moment they wished they could erase. I won't lie, hearing that shocked me. I grew up in a very conservative household where topics like that were considered extremely taboo. For a few minutes I didn't know how to respond. But eventually we talked through it. I asked questions. He answered them honestly. He didn't try to hide anything or avoid the conversation. Finally I asked one more question. I asked if the video was still online somewhere. He hesitated before answering. Then he nodded and said yes, it probably was still on a few websites. Then he asked me for one favor. He asked me not to look for it. He said watching it would only hurt me and bring back memories he wanted to leave behind. After thinking about it for a while, I agreed. I promised I wouldn't search for it. And for the most part, I kept that promise. The idea crossed my mind a few times, especially late at night when curiosity tends to creep in. But I always reminded myself that I had given him my word. Time passed. Months turned into years. Our relationship continued to grow stronger. We traveled together, met each other's families, and supported each other through difficult moments. Eventually we started talking seriously about the future. Marriage came up in conversation. So did buying a house together. Around the 2-year mark, we actually began looking at homes online. One afternoon Michael posted a message on social media saying how excited he was to go house hunting with me. He tagged me in the post. At the time it felt like a sweet moment. But that post ended up attracting attention from someone we didn't expect. A few hours later I received a private message. The message was from one of Michael's ex-girlfriends. I recognized her name immediately because Michael had mentioned her before. Their relationship had ended badly, and he had admitted that he treated her poorly during the reckless phase of his life. Her message started politely enough, but the tone quickly turned strange. She warned me that I should think carefully before settling down with Michael. Then she said something that instantly made me defensive. She wrote that there were things about him I didn't know. At that moment I felt annoyed more than anything else. Michael had already told me about his past. So I replied and told her I knew about his history and she should stay out of our relationship. After that message, she stopped responding. At least for a while. Later that evening, while Michael was in the shower, I checked my phone again. There was another message from her. This time the message contained a single link. Below the link were 2 words. Enjoy. The moment I saw it, I knew exactly what it probably was. The video Michael had told me about. For a moment I just stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to delete the message immediately. But curiosity is powerful, and sometimes curiosity wins. Eventually, against my better judgment, I clicked the link. The page loaded slowly. A video player appeared on the screen. At first I told myself I would only watch for a second, just to confirm whether it was actually him. But then something happened. I saw a tattoo that looked familiar. My heart started beating faster. And then I saw his face. It was definitely him. A younger version of Michael, but still unmistakably him. My chest tightened instantly. Seeing it was completely different from simply knowing about it. Before, it was just a story from his past. Now it was a real image in front of me. I couldn't keep watching. I slammed my laptop shut and sat there in silence for several seconds. My hands were shaking, my thoughts were racing, and before I could even process what I was feeling, I grabbed my bag and left the apartment. I drove to my friend Laura's place and stayed there for the night. Meanwhile Michael was calling and texting repeatedly, asking where I had gone and if something was wrong. Eventually I sent him a message saying I needed some time to think. But the truth was I didn't even know what I was thinking. I just felt overwhelmed. Seeing that video had created an image in my mind that I couldn't easily erase. Every time I thought about Michael, that image appeared again. It made me question things I had never questioned before. Could I still look at him the same way? Could I still be close to him without thinking about what I had seen? Was our future still possible? But after several hours of thinking, another realization slowly began to surface. Michael had told me the truth from the beginning. He had never hidden it from me. He had even warned me not to watch the video because it would hurt me. And he was right. The next morning I understood something important. Running away from the situation wasn't helping either of us. If our relationship had any chance of surviving, we needed to talk honestly. So I called him. The moment he answered, I could hear the relief in his voice. He sounded like he had barely slept. I told him I was coming home and that we needed to talk about everything. When I walked into the apartment later that day, he was sitting on the couch waiting. He looked worried. The moment he saw me, he stood up. I walked over and hugged him tightly. For a long moment neither of us said anything. Finally I told him the truth. I told him about the message from his ex. I told him about the link. And I admitted that I had clicked it and watched part of the video. He closed his eyes for a moment after hearing that. When he opened them again, they looked slightly red. But instead of yelling or getting angry, he just nodded slowly. He said he had suspected something like that might happen because his ex had also sent him a message earlier. Then he admitted that hearing I watched it did hurt him. Not because I was curious, but because he had hoped that part of his life would stay buried in the past. I apologized, more than once. I told him that seeing the video shocked me and that I reacted emotionally without thinking. We talked for a long time that evening. About trust, about mistakes, about how people change. By the end of the conversation, we both understood something important. The past cannot be erased. But the future is still something we build together. And sometimes love means accepting that the person standing in front of you today is not the same person they were years ago. When I finished telling Michael the truth, the room went quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet. The heavy kind. The kind where both people are thinking 1,000 things but don't know how to say them out loud. Michael sat back down on the couch and ran his hand through his hair. For a moment he didn't look at me. I could see the tension in his shoulders, and that made the guilt hit me even harder. Finally he spoke. His voice was calm, but there was pain underneath it. He said he wasn't angry that I had been curious. He understood that most people in my position probably would have clicked the link eventually. But he admitted something that surprised me. What hurt him wasn't just that I watched the video. What hurt him was the fear that I would never be able to see him the same way again. He told me that was exactly why he had begged me not to watch it. Because that video didn't represent the person he was anymore. It represented a reckless version of himself that he had spent years trying to leave behind. Hearing him say that made my chest tighten. Because the truth was, he wasn't wrong. Seeing the video had changed something in my mind. Not permanently maybe, but in that moment I couldn't stop replaying the image. And I hated that. I hated that something from years before we even met was suddenly sitting between us. I sat down next to him and told him exactly what was going on in my head. I told him that knowing about something and actually seeing it were completely different experiences. Before, it had just been a story. Now it was a memory I couldn't unsee. He nodded slowly. He said he understood. Then he admitted something else. He said that when he told me about the video 2 years earlier, he had spent days worrying that it would scare me away. He almost didn't tell me. But he said he didn't want to start a serious relationship with a secret hanging over him. So he forced himself to be honest. He said he thought if he told me the truth early, it would never become something that could explode later. Ironically, that was exactly what had just happened. But not because he hid anything. Because someone from his past decided to dig it up. We sat there for a while just talking quietly. Eventually I asked him something that had been on my mind since the night before. I asked him if he had ever tried to remove the video from the internet. He sighed. He said he had tried years ago. But once something spreads across multiple websites, it becomes almost impossible to completely erase. Even if one copy disappears, another one shows up somewhere else. He said that reality was something he had already accepted. What he didn't expect was for it to suddenly show up in our lives again after so many years. Then the conversation shifted to something else. His ex, the one who sent the link. Michael explained that their relationship had ended badly because he had been selfish and careless at the time. He admitted that he had hurt her emotionally, not intentionally, but through his reckless behavior. After they broke up, she stayed angry with him for a long time. At first she would send him angry messages occasionally. Then eventually she stopped, until now, when she saw that he was planning a future with someone else. Hearing that made the situation feel even more complicated, because in a strange way, I could understand why she might still be bitter. But sending that video to me felt cruel. It felt like she wanted to destroy something. Michael agreed. He said the moment he saw her message earlier that day, he had a feeling she might try something like this. That's why he immediately changed his social media privacy settings. He even suggested that I should do the same. Not because we were hiding anything, but because some people don't let go of the past easily. After talking about all of this, the tension between us slowly started to ease. The conversation became calmer, more honest. At one point Michael looked at me and asked a question that caught me off guard. He asked if I still saw a future with him. Not in an accusing way. More like someone who genuinely needed reassurance. I thought about it carefully before answering. The truth was that I still loved him. That hadn't changed. What had changed was my emotional reaction to something I had seen unexpectedly. And emotions can be complicated. So I told him the truth. I said yes, I still saw a future with him. But I also admitted that it might take a little time for my mind to fully move past the shock. He nodded and said that was fair. Then he said something that surprised me again. He said if I needed time or space to process everything, he would understand. He didn't want to pressure me into pretending everything was fine immediately. He just wanted us to keep being honest with each other. That moment reminded me why I fell in love with him in the first place. Because instead of getting defensive or angry, he was trying to understand how I felt. Later that night we ordered food and watched a movie. Not because everything was magically fixed, but because sometimes normal moments help bring things back to balance. Even so, my mind kept drifting back to the events of the previous night. Every once in a while, the memory of the video would pop into my head. And each time it did, I forced myself to remember something important. That video showed who Michael used to be, not who he was now. The next few days were surprisingly calm. Michael gave me space when I needed it, but he also stayed close. We talked more openly than we ever had before. About past mistakes, about personal growth, about how people change over time. At one point he told me something that stuck with me. He said that one of the hardest parts of changing your life is knowing that your old mistakes don't disappear. They stay there, sometimes hidden, sometimes forgotten, but always capable of resurfacing. The only thing you can control is who you choose to be today. Hearing that made me realize how much courage it must have taken for him to tell me the truth in the beginning. Most people might have tried to hide something like that, but he didn't, and because of that honesty, we were still sitting here working through the problem instead of discovering a secret years later. About a week after everything happened, something interesting occurred. The image from the video stopped appearing in my mind as often. At first it had felt overwhelming, but with time, the emotional intensity faded. The shock slowly disappeared, and what remained was the person I knew in real life. The man who made me laugh. The man who supported me during difficult days. The man who had been nothing but honest with me since the beginning. One evening we were sitting together on the balcony of our apartment. The sun was setting and the sky was turning orange. Michael looked at me and said something quietly. He said he was scared that night when I left. Not because he thought I was angry, but because he thought he might lose me. I reached over and held his hand. Then I told him something equally honest. I said that seeing the video had shaken me, but it also reminded me of something important. Everyone has a past. Some people just have a past that's easier to see than others. And in his case, the past happened to exist on the internet. But the person sitting next to me now wasn't the same reckless 22-year-old from that video. He was someone who had grown, someone who had changed, someone who had chosen to build a better life. And that was the person I loved. When I finished saying that, Michael smiled in a way I hadn't seen in several days. The tension that had been sitting between us finally seemed to lift. The past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt like something that could destroy our future. Over the next few weeks, life slowly started returning to normal. At least on the surface. Michael and I went back to our routines. We both went to work during the day, cooked dinner together at night, and sometimes watched movies before going to bed. But underneath all of that normality, something had shifted. Not in a bad way. Just different. For the first time in our relationship, we had faced something that genuinely tested us. Before that moment, everything between us had been smooth. Arguments were small and usually solved quickly. We rarely had serious conflict. But now we had seen how fragile things could feel when the past suddenly appears in the present. And in a strange way, that made our conversations deeper. One evening while we were eating dinner, Michael brought something up that I hadn't expected. He asked me if I still wanted to continue looking at houses. At first I didn't understand why he was asking. Then he explained. He said he didn't want me to feel pressured into moving forward with big life decisions if I still had doubts. That moment made me realize how careful he was being with my feelings. I told him the truth. Yes, the situation had shaken me at first. But the more time passed, the more I realized something important. The person in that video was not the person sitting across from me at the dinner table. People grow, people change, and in Michael's case, he had been trying to prove that for years before I even met him. So I told him yes. I still wanted our future together. I still wanted to look at houses. And hearing that seemed to release a huge amount of tension from his shoulders. The next weekend we went to see a few houses with a real estate agent. Walking through empty living rooms and kitchens together felt strangely comforting. It reminded me that our life was moving forward, not backward. Still, there was one problem we hadn't completely solved. Michael's ex, the one who had sent the video. At first we thought that once she delivered the link and caused chaos, she would disappear again. But that wasn't exactly what happened. A few days after everything settled down, Michael received another message from her. This time it wasn't a link. It was just a short sentence. She wrote that she hoped I knew what kind of person I was dating. Michael showed me the message immediately. Neither of us replied. Ignoring it seemed like the best option. But it still left an uncomfortable feeling. Not because we believed her words, but because it reminded us that some people hold on to bitterness for a very long time. A week later something else happened. I received a message request on social media. It was from someone I didn't recognize. Curious, I opened it. The message said something strange. The person wrote that they had seen a video online and thought I should know about it. For a moment my stomach dropped again. I immediately showed the message to Michael. He looked frustrated but not surprised. He explained that sometimes when one person starts sharing something online, others follow. But then he suggested something simple. Block the account. Don't respond. Don't give anyone the reaction they're hoping for. So that's exactly what we did. We blocked the account and moved on. Over time, those messages stopped. Eventually the noise faded away. And life continued. About a month after the whole situation began, Michael and I were sitting on the couch late at night. We had just finished watching a movie. Neither of us felt like going to bed yet, so we stayed there talking. The conversation drifted into deeper topics. At one point Michael said something that surprised me. He said that when he was younger, he used to believe people never really change. He thought everyone just stayed the same and repeated the same mistakes forever. But as he got older, he realized that wasn't true. He said sometimes people hit a moment in their lives where they finally see themselves clearly. And once that happens, they either choose to grow, or they stay stuck. He said meeting me happened after he made the decision to grow. Listening to him talk about that made me reflect on the past 2 years. When we first started dating, he had already been working on becoming a better person. He wasn't trying to prove something to me. He had already started that process long before I arrived in his life. And that realization changed the way I looked at everything. His past mistakes weren't something he was hiding. They were something he had already confronted. And maybe that was why he had the courage to tell me about the video in the first place. A few days later we went to see another house. This one felt different from the others. The moment we walked through the front door, we both looked at each other with the same expression. It had a small living room with large windows, a simple kitchen, and a little backyard that caught the afternoon sunlight. Nothing fancy, but it felt warm. While the real estate agent was explaining details about the property, Michael leaned slightly closer to me and whispered something. He said he could picture us living there, cooking dinner together, hosting friends, maybe even raising a family someday. Hearing him say that made my heart feel full, because in that moment I realized something. A few weeks earlier, I almost let a moment from his past destroy everything we had built together. Not because he lied, not because he betrayed me, but because seeing something unexpected shocked me, and that shock almost clouded everything else. Standing in that quiet house, I understood something very clearly. A person's past does not automatically define their future. What defines their future is what they do after those mistakes. The choices they make, the growth they pursue, the honesty they show. Later that evening we made an offer on the house. Driving home after signing the paperwork, Michael reached over and squeezed my hand. He didn't say anything at first, but after a few minutes he spoke quietly. He said thank you. I asked him why, and he said something I'll probably remember forever. He said thank you for believing in the person I became, instead of judging the person I used to be. I looked out the window for a moment before answering. Then I told him something equally honest. I said love isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about deciding that someone's future is worth more than their worst mistake. Michael smiled when he heard that, and as we drove home together, the road ahead of us felt clear. The past was still there, but it no longer had the power to control our story. A few weeks after we made the offer on the house, something happened that really tested everything we had talked about. Up until that point, things had been calm. Too calm, honestly. Part of me kept waiting for the situation with Michael's ex to explode again. And unfortunately, it did. One afternoon I was at work when my phone started vibrating nonstop. At first I ignored it because I was in the middle of finishing something important. But when the notifications kept coming, I finally checked, and my stomach dropped instantly. Someone had posted a link online. The same video, but this time, it wasn't just a random message sent privately. Someone had posted it publicly on a social media thread where Michael's name had been mentioned. It wasn't on his profile, but it was connected to a conversation about him. And a few people had already started commenting. Some comments were confused, some were curious, and a few were just cruel. For a moment I just stared at my phone, feeling the same shock I felt the first time I saw that video. My first thought wasn't even about myself. It was about Michael, because I knew how much he hated that part of his past. And now it was being dragged back into the open again. I called him immediately. When he answered, I asked if he had seen what was happening online. There was a short silence. Then he said yes. His voice sounded tired, not angry, not panicked, just tired. He told me someone had sent him the link earlier that morning. Most likely the same person who had been causing trouble before. But then he said something that surprised me. He said he wasn't going to respond to it. Not publicly, not privately. He said the people who wanted to cause drama were hoping for a reaction. And the best thing we could do was refuse to give them one. At first that idea frustrated me. Part of me wanted to defend him. Part of me wanted to argue with the people leaving rude comments. But after thinking about it for a moment, I realized he was right. People on the internet often feed on reactions. Ignoring them takes away their power. Later that evening we sat down together and talked about it calmly. Michael admitted something during that conversation that I had never fully realized before. He said living with that video online had always been like carrying a shadow behind him. Most of the time it stayed hidden, but every once in a while, something would shine a light on it again. And when that happened, he had two choices. He could either let it control his life, or he could accept that the past existed and continue moving forward anyway. He had chosen the second option years ago, and hearing him explain it that way made something click in my mind. The video didn't define him. It was just a moment from a completely different chapter of his life. The real Michael was the person who spent years trying to become better. The person who sat down with me early in our relationship and told the truth even when it was uncomfortable. The person who chose honesty instead of hiding something. Over the next few days the online conversation slowly faded. Just like most things on the internet, people eventually got bored and moved on to something else. The link disappeared from the discussion. The comments stopped, and life returned to normal again. About a month later we got some good news. Our offer on the house had been accepted. I still remember the moment we got the call. Michael was standing in the kitchen when his phone rang. He answered, listened for about 30 seconds, and then looked at me with a huge smile. We got the house. I jumped up and hugged him so hard we almost knocked over one of the kitchen chairs. In that moment, everything that had happened over the past few months suddenly felt smaller. Not meaningless, but smaller, because our future was still moving forward. A few weeks later we were standing inside that same house again. But this time it was officially ours. There were boxes everywhere. The living room was half empty except for a couch and a few bags. Sunlight was coming through the windows exactly the same way it had the first time we visited. Michael stood in the middle of the room looking around quietly. Then he turned to me and said something that made me laugh. He said, "You know, this place looks a lot smaller now that we own it." I told him that was probably because we were finally seeing it without the excitement of the first visit. But the truth was, the house didn't need to be huge or perfect. It just needed to be ours. Later that evening we sat on the floor of the living room eating takeout because we hadn't unpacked the kitchen yet. It was simple, but it felt right. At one point Michael looked at me seriously and asked something that caught me off guard. He asked if I ever regretted staying with him after everything that happened. I thought about the question carefully before answering. Then I told him the truth. No, because that difficult moment had actually shown me something important about our relationship. It showed me how we handle problems together. It showed me that honesty matters more than perfection. And it showed me that people really can change if they want to. Michael listened quietly while I said all of that. Then he nodded slowly. He said he had spent years worrying that his past would eventually destroy any relationship he tried to build. But meeting me had changed that fear. Because instead of running away when things became complicated, I stayed and worked through it with him. I smiled and told him something simple. Everyone has a past. Some people just have a past that's easier to find online. But the past is only one chapter of a person's story. It doesn't have to be the ending. Michael looked around our new living room again and smiled. Then he said something that perfectly summed up everything we had been through. He said the past might always exist somewhere on the internet, but our future was sitting right here in this room. And that future was ours to build. As we sat there on the floor of our new home, surrounded by unpacked boxes and empty walls waiting to be filled, I realized something. The past had tried to interfere with our story. But in the end, it didn't win. Because what matters most isn't the mistakes someone made years ago. What matters most is who they choose to be today. And the person sitting next to me that night was someone worth building a future with.